Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a really fascinating look, I think, a deep strategic journey into how a nation, especially one where the military plays such a huge role, manages its global image.
Yeah, its identity on the world stage.
Exactly. We're digging into some specific excerpts from a pretty exhaustive study, The Generals of Pakistan, by Zaheer Ahmad Meer, and we're focusing particularly on how Pakistan's military leadership, well, how they strategically changed their use of soft power over something like 6 decades.
It's quite the study in institutional adaptability, really. For a long time, geopolitical analysis tends to zero in on hard power, the weapons, troop movements, maybe coercive diplomacy.
The usual stuff.
Right. But what Meer's work really brings home quite clearly is that power isn't just about that kinetic capability. It's fundamentally about influence. And that's built through culture, through trade, commerce, and maybe most importantly, through the ideas a nation projects out there.
Okay, let's pause there because that idea seems absolutely central. We need to unpack this because it feels like the foundation for our whole deep dive today. The Army, as an institution, they figured out pretty early on that just defending borders wasn't enough, right? That was like the minimum.
Low bar for security, yeah.
Yeah.
To survive, maybe even thrive, they needed something more. The goal, and I'm paraphrasing the source here a bit, was essentially to penetrate minds and hearts worldwide.
Wow, okay. Minds and hearts worldwide. That's ambitious.
It really is. And that's the core insight, I think. It's about proactive perception management, thinking about how you're seen and shaping that elevated to the highest level of national strategy.
So not just reacting, but actively shaping.
Precisely. They recognized that long-term stability, their security, it depended on two main things. One, winning and keeping powerful allies. And two, consistently shaping the global narrative about Pakistan.
Because if you let others define you.
You lose strategic autonomy.
Exactly.
The generals seem to conclude, based on Meer's analysis, that they had to project strength not just on battlefields, which is the traditional view, but in every global forum, imaginable, cultural, diplomatic, economic, you name it.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty ambitious then. We're going to trace this whole evolution looking chronologically at 4 distinct eras, and within those, 4 very different approaches to soft power used by Pakistan's military leaders. We're starting way back with the soft power of, like, physical progress in the 60s.
That's right. And we'll bring it right up to today, looking at things like digital financial diplomacy. It's quite a journey.
It sounds like it.
And this chronological structure, it really works like a mirror, doesn't it? It reflects how Pakistan kept tweaking, sometimes completely changing its global brand. And it was always in direct response to shifting geopolitical realities, moving from Cold War alliances, then dealing with post-9/11 scrutiny, and now navigating this digital investment age we're in.
Okay, let's dive in. Starting at the beginning, the 1960s, under General Ayub Khan. The source labels this era as being defined by the soft power of progress.
Yeah, and the context for Ayub Khan's era, you have to understand, was really one of necessity. Pakistan was still a relatively new post-colonial state. It needed massive foreign aid. It needed development loans. It needed global validation, frankly.
To be seen as legitimate, as viable.
Absolutely. So the primary strategic goal back then was to project Pakistan as this modern, rising Asian nation, stable, disciplined, a worthy recipient of international confidence. They were basically selling stability itself as their product.
Okay, so how did they actually orchestrate that projection? The source seems to put a lot of emphasis on high-level, very visible diplomacy as the first major tool.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just standard diplomacy. It was, you could say, a carefully calibrated performance. Yeah. The source really highlights the strategic importance of Ayub Khan's state visits, specifically to the big global powers Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. And often, these were packed into quite a short time frame.
So not just routine visits?
No, not at all. This wasn't merely transactional, like going to ask for aid. It was a highly theatrical signaling maneuver. It was designed deliberately to generate international respect. And crucially, to show the entire world that Pakistan was this non-aligned, strategically vital player, important enough, to command attention from all 3 major competing global powers at the time.
Ah, that's a really critical nuance there. By engaging sort of equally with the Soviets, the Chinese, and the Americans, Ayub wasn't just trying to maximize aid from all sides.
Although that was certainly part of it.
Right, but he was also establishing this complex geopolitical balancing act. It amplified Pakistan's strategic value precisely because of its non-alignment. It was like visually communicating, look, we're an independent power broker here.
Precisely. And that demonstration of, well, geopolitical sophistication, it translated almost immediately into credibility. But diplomacy needs something tangible to back it up. You can't just rely on state visits.
You need proof.
Exactly. So the second methodology, the one that really solidified this soft power message, came from tangible success stories within Pakistan itself.
Okay, so turning internal development projects into external credibility boosters. We're talking about literal construction projects becoming diplomatic assets.
That's exactly it. The source goes into detail about how the government actively promoted massive infrastructure projects. Think about the construction of major dams, the establishment of large-scale industries, and generally projecting this image of internal discipline, bureaucratic efficiency.
Orderliness.
Orderliness, yes. These weren't just domestic policies aimed at improving the country. They were symbols deliberately broadcast globally. The opening of the Mangla Dam, for instance, wasn't just a local event. It became a major photo opportunity, something Ayub Khan leveraged skillfully to help secure significant development loans.
Interesting.
And the disciplined, planned nature of these big projects, it projected a sense of order. The message was, Pakistan is a sound investment, not some risky gamble.
So, okay, if the product they were selling globally was stability and progress, then the dams, the new factories, they were like the hard evidence, the glossy, irrefutable brochures you could present to the World Bank or foreign governments.
That's a perfect analogy, actually. And the key lesson that Meer extracts from this particular era is that progress itself, visible material success, becomes a form of soft power. It translates almost instantly into credibility on the world stage, especially when you're looking for capital or technology transfer.
It makes sense. You show you can build big things, manage complex projects. You seem like a safer bet.
Right. But here's where the analysis needs to get a bit deeper, maybe pose a question. Did the source indicate how this intense focus on, projecting material success might have, perhaps, ignored or overshadowed other things, like burgeoning internal political dissent or regional tensions bubbling up at the time?
That's a great question. And yeah, Meer's work does suggest a kind of trade-off there. The success of this soft power strategy was measured by its external effectiveness. For those international partners, the disciplined image, the impressive infrastructure, well, that was proof of stable governance. It justified their continued investment and support.
So it worked, externally at least.
Yes, the strategy definitely succeeded in securing aid and recognition on the global stage. But, and this is the crucial part, it projected a highly centralized, maybe even authoritarian kind of stability, and that often masked underlying political volatility back home. The soft power projection was primarily for the international audience, not necessarily reflecting the full domestic reality.
Okay. That insight really confirms that the strategy was almost purely external-facing. If you can control the narrative internationally about your national discipline and your development successes, well, you get treated with a certain respect, regardless of how complex or messy your internal politics might be.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the next big shift. Because that focus on material progress, on secular modernity, it takes a really sharp turn with the next figure, General Zia-ul-Haq. We seem to move completely away from infrastructure and dive headfirst into the much more, well, volatile world of faith and ideology.
It's a radical pivot, no question. And historically defining for Pakistan's global image. You have to remember, by the time Zia took power, the global dynamics had fundamentally changed. That initial post-colonial enthusiasm for non-aligned modernization had kind of faded.
And other major events were happening.
Critically, yes. The Iranian Revolution had just happened, and then the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan next door. These events completely recast the role of Islam in geopolitics. So Zia's strategy was to move the country's external influence away from that secular progress model of Ayub's and anchor it firmly in faith. Islam itself became Pakistan's new soft power tool.
And the mechanism for projecting this wasn't just rhetoric, right? It seems highly organizational, very formal, positioning Pakistan as the central fortress of Islam using institutional leverage.
Yes, absolutely. The source highlights Pakistan's absolutely crucial role during this period as the chairman of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC. And this happened at a really pivotal moment.
So not just a symbolic role.
Far from it. This wasn't just a rotating diplomatic chair they happened to be sitting in. It was actively leveraged to place Pakistan right at the center of the Muslim world's political discourse. And crucially, its funding apparatus, too. As the chair, Pakistan could significantly shape the global agenda for Muslim nations, coordinate political stances at places like the UN, and essentially translate that shared religious commonality into real diplomatic weight. And, importantly, into financial resources flowing from wealthier Gulf states.
Okay, so the OIC chairmanship provided this formal structure, this platform to mobilize ideological solidarity, turning shared faith into tangible diplomatic clout and, well, cash.
You got it. And this organizational platform, this OIC role, it directly enabled what became the most impactful global cause Pakistan leveraged during this era. Its support for the Afghan jihad against the Soviet Union.
Right, the Afghan Mujahideen.
Exactly. And the source meticulously points out that Pakistan's support for them wasn't just framed locally or regionally. It was packaged globally to boost the nation's image.
No.
Not merely as a regional player anymore, but as a resilient defender of Muslim causes, fighting on the front line of the Cold War, essentially.
This is fascinating. This is where ideology literally becomes hard currency in the geopolitical sphere. By championing this global cause, rooted so deeply in faith, Pakistan managed to garner massive international support, specifically from the West, who saw it as fighting the Soviets, and from the Gulf states, who saw it as defending Islam.
And in doing so, it shifted its international reputation again, from just being seen as a developing regional state to being perceived as a vital, ideologically driven global partner in a major conflict.
The key lesson here seems profound then. Ideology, when it's effectively channeled, especially through formal mechanisms like the OIC, can project influence that goes way beyond traditional geopolitical borders.
Absolutely. That shared faith created a powerful block of diplomatic and financial support that was, frankly, critical for Pakistan's survival and its strategic goals during a very complex decade. But, and we always have to look at the other side, we also must acknowledge the long-term trade-offs that were inherent to the strategy.
Okay, so what does Meer's analysis suggest about maybe the downside, like the cost of making that sharp ideological pivot?
Well, it suggests that while the strategy definitely secured immediate, massive geopolitical advantages, resources, relevance, alliances, it also fundamentally altered the nation's projected identity. It made it much, much harder to perhaps later revert to that more secular, progressive image Ayub Khan had tried to cultivate.
Lock them into a particular brand.
In a way, yes. This strong ideological foundation created new internal complexities, religious and social. And externally, it arguably set the stage for intense scrutiny later on, especially around issues of religious moderation versus extremism. So you could say it was a highly successful short-term soft power maneuver, but one that created significant long-term branding liabilities down the road.
And those liabilities, it seems, came home to roost pretty dramatically with our third general, General Pervez Musharraf, especially in that immediate, incredibly complex aftermath of 9/11.
Absolutely. The global stage wasn't just looking at Pakistan. It was hostile, deeply scrutinizing, and fundamentally suspicious. This environment demanded a completely new, urgent kind of soft power. It became about the power of narrative and relentless media mastery.
Pure crisis management on a global scale.
Played out in the full glare of the 2004-7 news cycle. Musharraf almost instantly became the singular most visible face of Pakistan to the West. And he had to navigate this almost impossible dual role, didn't he? On one hand, Pakistan was now a primary U.S. ally in the war on terror, but on the other, it was a nation intensely scrutinized for internal religious movements and its nuclear status.
So his soft power strategy had to revolve entirely around managing that inherent contradiction.
Exactly, which meant creating and relentlessly pushing a new ideological concept, a brand almost, enlightened moderation.
Enlightened moderation. Okay, it sounds a bit academic maybe, but you're saying it was a carefully crafted brand. What was the specific goal?
The goal was very specific: to present Pakistan as a moderate Muslim democracy, to actively contrast it with the extremist narratives that were absolutely dominating the global headlines at that time, particularly tackling the dangerous idea that Pakistan was an unstable, potentially unreliable nuclear arms state.
So damage control, but also trying to reclaim the narrative.
Precisely. Not just reacting, but proactively defining a middle ground. And the methodology he used was, well, pretty unprecedented for a leader in that position. relentless personal media engagement.
You mean like interviews and press conferences?
Way beyond standard press briefings. The source notes that Musharraf gave literally dozens of interviews. We're talking CNN, BBC, major European newspapers, American outlets. It was this incredibly proactive, direct engagement strategy. He essentially bypassed the slower traditional diplomatic channels to manage external perception directly with the global audience in real time.
The leader himself becomes the chief communications strategist, essentially. Instead of relying on diplomats sending cables, he's on every major news channel, personally defining his country's intentions and trying to build reliability.
Yes. And crucially, he didn't just talk about moderation in the abstract. He used specific, demonstrable internal achievements to project strength and stability externally. He very skillfully leaned on two critical domestic points to try and prove that Pakistan was stable, forward-looking, and capable of being a reliable partner.
Okay, what were those 2 points? The first one you mentioned earlier was defending the nation's nuclear program. That seems counterintuitive, maybe, if you're trying to project moderation.
It does, but you have to see the context. The nuclear program was under enormous international pressure and suspicion, especially post 9/11. So defending it wasn't about aggression. It was framed as a projection of state sovereignty, technological competence. It signaled Pakistan was a mature, stable state capable of handling critical strategic assets responsibly.
Okay, so it establishes a baseline of seriousness, of capability.
Right. That nuclear arsenal provided a kind of security umbrella, almost a prerequisite, that allowed Musharraf to then pivot to softer, more economic messaging. Which brings us to the second point he emphasized, which was genuinely revolutionary for soft power at the time, promoting the burgeoning IT and telecom boom happening within Pakistan.
That is a brilliant juxtaposition, isn't it? Combining the hard and soft messaging. You project strength and strategic deterrence with the nuclear program, and then immediately follow it up by projecting future economic viability, liberalization through the IT revolution. It's like telling the world, look, we're responsible and stable, and we're also embracing global capitalism and digital progress.
That combination was arguably Musharraf's strategic genius in this context. And the key lesson Meer pulls out here is that leadership, when combined with proactive, consistent, and very personal media engagement, equals incredibly potent global narrative power. This era really marks a transition, doesn't it? From soft power derived mainly from internal physical progress, like with Ayub, or from abstract ideology like Zia, to a soft power centered almost entirely on external perception management, engineered and personified by a charismatic, media-savvy, accessible leader.
So how did the source material ultimately assess the success of this enlightened moderation strategy? Did it actually manage to win over the key global skeptics, especially thinking about, say, Europe?
The analysis presented is quite nuanced on that. Meer suggests that while the strategy was definitely successful in securing crucial, immediate diplomatic support from the U.S. right after 9/11, which was vital, its reception in Europe was perhaps more mixed.
Why mixed in Europe?
Well, skepticism regarding things like religious freedom, democratic consolidation, internal stability, that tended to be higher in European capitals. However, the source still argues that the simple act of having Musharraf himself proactively engaging, articulating a clear, seemingly reformist vision, was in itself a massive soft power win.
Just being present in the conversation.
Exactly. It effectively replaced an information vacuum, a vacuum that extremists had been very adept at exploiting, with a direct, consistent, state-sponsored narrative. So success wasn't necessarily measured by the complete elimination of skepticism everywhere, but rather by gaining a seat back at the table and, to a large extent, controlling the conversation about Pakistan at a critical time.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us right up to, well, almost the present day, or at least the most modern iteration of this evolving strategy under Field Marshal Asim Munir. Now we're fully immersed in the digital age, right? Defined by global financial connectivity. And the soft power focus seems to have shifted decisively again this time towards the economy and technology.
This is absolutely the modern pivot. You look at geopolitics today, and it's increasingly defined by things like capital flow, supply chain resilience, technological integration. In this environment, the ability to attract serious investment and prove your technological competence, that's arguably the strongest form of soft power available.
So the narrative battles haven't disappeared.
Oh, not at all. They continue. But the top priority now seems indisputably focused on economic survival and, ideally, growth.
Right. Let's talk about the primary mechanism mentioned for this economic soft power projection, the Special Investment Facilitation Council, or SIFC. The source suggests this is more than just another government investment body, correct?
Much, much more. The SIFC is described almost as the institutional embodiment of modern economic soft power in the Pakistani context. It's not just an office designed to, streamline paperwork for investors. It's presented as a high-level, military-backed council. And it's explicitly created to engage key economic partners, particularly looking at Gulf states and China, by offering them pretty unprecedented guarantees. Guarantees of security for their investment, efficiency in processing, and crucially, policy consistency.
And the military backing is key to that projection.
That's the argument, that military oversight is positioned as the soft power mechanism itself. In what's often perceived as a volatile region or political environment, the SIFC aims to project stability and a real seriousness of purpose directly to those large, often risk-averse foreign investors. It's signaling that investment decisions are protected at the highest institutional level within the state.
So the core message becomes, your capital will be safe here, and your project won't get bogged down in bureaucracy or derailed by political instability. That guarantee, backed by the institution, that's the new soft power currency.
That seems to be exactly the pitch. And alongside this formal structure, the SIFC, we also see specific projects being highlighted again. Things designed to make those positive global headlines and project economic confidence. The source mentions the continued focus on CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor.
Still a major symbol.
A massive symbol of regional connectivity and, of course, the strategic partnership with China. But interestingly, there's also a focus on aligning with contemporary global values through initiatives like Green Pakistan.
Ah, the environmental angle. How does that fit into soft power?
Well, the Green Pakistan initiative is framed as a strategic nod towards global environmental, social, and governance priorities, ESG as it's known. By dedicating resources and rhetoric to climate-aware development, Pakistan is projecting itself as a responsible global citizen aligned with modern sustainability goals. And that's become increasingly critical for attracting Western and multinational corporate investment today. Investors look at ESG factors now.
Okay, so CPEC shows scale and partnership. Green Pakistan shows responsibility. Those are the macro-level indicators trying to build economic confidence. But the thing I found really indicative of this modern shift, maybe the most cutting-edge part, is the concept the source mentions. Blockchain diplomacy. That sounds quite technical.
It is technical, but its implications for soft power are potentially profound. Blockchain diplomacy is perhaps the clearest signal of this modern pivot towards technology as trust. At its core, blockchain technology is all about security, transparency, and immutability, meaning records can't be easily changed.
Like distributed ledgers and all that.
Exactly. So when Pakistan signals an interest, even diplomatically, in integrating blockchain technology into state functions, say, for things like land registries, customs clearance, or verifying supply chains, it sends an immediate, powerful signal to global financial partners.
How does that translate into soft power, into trust? What's the connection?
Think about what foreign investors fear most, especially in developing economies. Often, it's corruption and bureaucratic opacity, right? The lack of transparency. By engaging in diplomacy related to transparent distributed ledger technology like blockchain, Pakistan is essentially sending a message. Look, we are committed to modern digital integrity. We're working on systems designed to remove the space for corruption, ensuring that your assets, your contracts, are recorded securely on an immutable ledger.
So it proactively tackles that core perception of instability and corruption.
That's the idea. It tries to make the country a more attractive, less risky investment landscape by leveraging the inherent trust factor of the technology itself. It's almost like the technology builds trust in a way that could bypass years of traditional political messaging or promises.
That is a powerful lesson and, yeah, a very far cry from building physical dams back in Ayub Khan's era. The key lesson extracted here seems pretty definitive then. In our contemporary world, economy and technology, and especially demonstrating digital integrity, these are identified as the strongest, most effective vectors of soft power.
They really are the key levers of the digital age, aren't they? It represents a complete shift in focus. From selling a national identity or ideology to selling a functioning, reliable, and ideally technologically advanced economic opportunity.
Okay, wow. We've covered 4 really distinct eras, 4 completely different philosophies of how Pakistan projected itself to the world. Let's try and step back now, maybe do a bit of comparative synthesis. The source material itself provides a rather brilliant summary that helps tie these seemingly disparate strategies together.
Yeah, it does. If you look at the whole evolution laid out side by side, what you see are these 4 distinct methods, used over 6 decades. Each one seems like a pretty logical, strategic response to the specific geopolitical moment it occurred in. And yet, underneath it all, they seem unified by a single overarching goal.
Right. So we started with Ayub Khan, who used modernization as the core image, building dams, showing discipline that was about building international investment and gaining respect.
Then, as we discussed, came Zia-ul-Haq. He leveraged Islamic faith, used the OIOC structure as the primary source of influence. That garnered diplomatic support and significant aid, largely through global ideological alignment, particularly during the Afghan conflict.
Next up was Musharraf. His strategy was almost entirely about media engagement and pushing that narrative of enlightened moderation, a crucial global narrative designed to help Pakistan survive, even counter that intense post-9/11 scrutiny, largely by personalizing the national brand through his own visibility.
And that brings us to the current era under Munir. Here, the focus has explicitly shifted to economy and technology. Institutionalized through bodies like the SIFC, demonstrated through things like blockchain diplomacy and green initiatives, these are positioned as the key soft power tools for this capital-driven digital age we live in.
It really is an incredible study in institutional adaptability when you lay it out like that. And the source confirms, doesn't it, that despite these massive philosophical differences in the methods chosen across the decades, the ultimate aim remains singular and remarkably constant.
Absolutely. That constant goal, the sort of North Star guiding this entire multi-decade soft power project, according to Meer's analysis, has always been the same: to have Pakistan respected and recognized worldwide. Whether that recognition was sought through projecting military discipline, ideological leadership, media savvy, or now economic viability, that persistent pursuit of global recognition seems to be the driving force behind every single strategic pivot.
So what does this pattern of pivoting, essentially repositioning the national brand quite fundamentally every 20 years or so, what does that suggest about the nation's maybe strategic resilience or its core identity?
That's a great question. I think it suggests, first and foremost, an acute institutional awareness, certainly within the military leadership described, of shifting geopolitical currencies. They recognize that the global market for influence changes constantly. You simply cannot sell 1960s-style non-alignment in a 2020s climate-conscious, digitally driven market.
You have to adapt your product.
You have to adapt your pitch, your product, everything. So that capacity to adapt, moving from promoting physical infrastructure to promoting intangible assets like faith, then shifting to controlling narrative, and now focusing on guaranteeing digital finance, that adaptability itself is a profound form of strategic resilience. It shows an institution, at least, capable of redefining its national assets to try and match perceived global demand.
The analysis presented in The Generals of Pakistan, it's certainly compelling in demonstrating that true power, at least the sustainable kind, seems ultimately rooted in successfully managed perception, maybe even more than in military hardware alone.
It really hammers that point home. The generals, as portrayed, understood that the really decisive conflict for influence, for long-term standing, is often fought far from any traditional battlefield. It's fought in global media outlets, in financial markets, in cultural spheres.
And the sheer breadth of the soft power tools they employed over the years really underscores that point, doesn't it? The source gives that fantastic recap of the range.
Yeah, it's worth repeating. From dams to diplomacy, from jihad to global media, from IT to blockchain. That's a toolkit that literally spans the entire spectrum of human endeavor, from the physical to the digital, from the ideological to the economic. It shows a remarkable willingness to use whatever tool seems most effective at the time.
And that progression itself, from something as tangible as civil engineering like dams, to something as highly abstract and digital as blockchain trust mechanisms, that feels like the perfect encapsulation of a nation constantly adapting its strategic outreach to try and match the world's evolving priorities.
It really is. It tells a story of a strategic calculation. That ultimately being respected, being seen as viable and reliable, is probably more sustainable in the long run than simply being feared or becoming isolated.
A critical takeaway, I think, for anyone studying global politics or international relations.
Absolutely.
And maybe on that note, let's leave you, our listeners, with the source's overarching final thought. This continuous projection of strength, rooted sometimes in faith, sometimes in progress, always in resilience, leads Meer to the conclusion that Pakistan is rising and the world is watching. But let's focus back for a second on that most contemporary tool we discussed, blockchain diplomacy.
Right, the tech angle.
Yeah, we've seen how strategically it's being positioned in this context. So here's something for you to consider. How many other nations, maybe particularly smaller emerging economies, might be quietly leveraging digital financial technology right now? things like central bank digital currencies or secure digital land registries using blockchain. How might they be using these tools to build their own soft power, to secure investments, perhaps even finding ways to circumvent traditional, often slower diplomatic barriers entirely?
That's a fantastic point for further thought, because the next layer of deep analysis for anyone interested should absolutely be tracking how that perceived technological neutrality and financial transparency, which are hallmarks of blockchain, are being used by various emerging economies, used specifically to build trust, attract high-value capital, and potentially bypass the slower, more subjective, often political process of international vetting. The digital age is fundamentally changing how countries establish and project their soft power profiles, making technology itself a core geopolitical asset.
Definitely something for you to mull over as you navigate the ever-shifting complexities of global influence. Thank you for diving deep with us today.